Hi everyone, in this video, we're going to be looking at what appears to be a huge problem for Christians everywhere. A lot of biblical scholars and archaeologists say that there are discrepancies between what the Bible says and archaeology. In other words, it seems like the Bible is wrong about certain things that we can learn through archaeological evidence. Now, I've heard some Christians try to respond to this by saying things like, well, the Bible is not an archaeological textbook. And while I agree with the sentiment, I think we can do better than that response. So in this video, I'm going to show you how you can reconcile all of these supposed discrepancies between the Bible and archaeology. Now, before we get into this, I want to make it clear that I believe the Bible is true. Every word is true. But I also recognize that sometimes people will point to certain archaeological findings and say, the Bible contradicts itself or the Bible is wrong here. So let me give you 4 ways to deal with those supposed discrepancies. First, let's look at the subject of cities mentioned in the Bible that archaeologists say never existed. People will often say the Bible mentions certain cities and archaeological evidence does not bear that out. Now, there are a couple of different ways to respond to this. First of all, we need to realize that many times when someone makes this claim, they're actually referring to cities that are mentioned in extra-biblical sources. For example, there's a lot of talk about this city called Sodom. Some people will say, the Bible says that Sodom was destroyed by God because of its wickedness, but there's no archaeological evidence for that. They'll say the same thing about Gomorrah. But what if I told you that both Sodom and Gomorrah were actually mentioned in Babylonian and Hittite records? These cities were real places. They are mentioned outside of the Bible. The Bible just doesn't mention them, but because they're mentioned in other places, we know that they did exist. Then there are other cities that are mentioned only in the Bible that archaeologists have said never existed. This is where things get kind of tricky because, yes, there are cities mentioned in the Bible that archaeologists haven't found yet. But would it be wise to say that the Bible is wrong before we actually find the evidence for those cities? What if I told you that archaeologists had recently discovered the city of Ashkelon, which was mentioned in the Old Testament? It was a very wicked place. What if I told you that archaeologists recently found this city after it was mentioned in the Bible for 3,000 years? Sometimes people will say the Bible mentions cities that we haven't found yet, therefore, the Bible must be wrong. But maybe we should just say that we haven't found the evidence for these cities yet. No. 2 is the subject of the census under King David, which is mentioned in 2 Chronicles. Chapter 21, it says that an evil spirit from God came upon him, and he wanted to take a census of Israel. When David did this, God was angry because he didn't want the census to happen. So God sent a plague upon Israel, and 70,000 people died. Now, people say that this is not true, because there's no archaeological evidence for this census. But again, it's important to realize that just because we don't have evidence for something in the physical world doesn't mean it didn't happen. Just think about all of the things that happened in your life last week. Do you think there's a good chance that an archaeologist will find evidence for every single one of those things in 100 years? Probably not. There's a good chance that there will be no archaeological evidence left behind for many of the things that happened in your life last week. Same thing with the census. Just because we don't have evidence for it now doesn't mean that it didn't happen. The third way that people try to use archaeology against the Bible is when they talk about people who lived long before Abraham. They'll say that the Bible says that the world was created in 6 days, and that Adam was the first man. But what about all of these fossils that we have found of dinosaurs and other creatures that supposedly lived millions of years ago? Does that mean the Bible is wrong? Well, let's first of all remember that the Bible says in Genesis chapter 1 that the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And then the Spirit of God moved over the face of the waters. Notice that it says the earth was without form and void. If that's the case, then the earth wasn't necessarily inhabited by people, but it could have been inhabited by animals. Also, we should remember that the Bible teaches the doctrine of creation, but it doesn't go into great detail explaining how exactly it happened. There are lots of questions that the Bible doesn't answer. And the fact that the Bible doesn't answer these questions doesn't mean that we can just assume anything we want. We should still use common sense. Should we really believe that humans and dinosaurs roamed the earth at the same time? I think the answer is obvious. This is where it's good to separate what the Bible teaches in its theology versus what the Bible teaches in its science. The Bible teaches that the earth is young. It also teaches that God created everything. But the Bible doesn't teach us much beyond that. It's not a science book. Therefore, We should use our God-given ability to observe the world around us and determine things like how old the Earth is based on observable evidence. And I personally believe that the evidence shows that the Earth is only thousands of years old and not millions. Finally, the fourth thing we need to consider is that archaeologists have actually found evidence for a lot of the things mentioned in the Bible. For example, there's so much archaeological evidence for the destruction of Jerusalem, for the Babylonian exile, for the Egyptian oppression of Israel, and for the time of the judges in Israel. Archaeologists have found so much evidence that confirms the truth of the Bible. So whenever someone tries to tell you that the Bible is wrong because of archaeological evidence, you can point to all of the evidence that archaeologists have found confirms the truth of the Bible. You can also point out that just because we don't have evidence for something in the physical world doesn't mean it didn't happen. Think about when Jesus walked on water. Was that an amazing miracle? Yes, but do we have any physical evidence that Jesus walked on water? No. Why? Because water doesn't leave behind any record of what happens to it. It evaporates. Most of the things that happened in your life last week will eventually be forgotten, even though they did happen. So, just because we don't have physical evidence for certain biblical events doesn't mean that they didn't happen. So the next time someone tries to tell you that the Bible is wrong because of archaeological evidence, you can keep these four things in mind. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever heard someone say that the Bible is wrong because of archaeology? If so, share your thoughts in the comments below. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.